week 3 of the series, The Church Just Wants Your Money. You know, we've talked about, you've thought that, you may have said that, you've more than likely heard that. And hopefully, through the first couple weeks of this series, I'm kind of debunking that myth that the church just wants your money. But next week will be the last message in this series, and don't miss next Sunday. I am telling you, don't miss next Sunday. I think it will be one of the top 10 sermons I've probably ever given, and the sermon isn't even that long. I think I got it down to an hour and a half. So don't miss that. Pack a lunch. But if you miss it, we're not going to tell you about it. We're not going to put that one up on the website, just to let you know how important it is to be here next Sunday. But we will put it up on the website. If you don't know, we are 2 weeks ago. Ben gave us the ability on our website to actually upload video now. So we will be doing the first 2 weeks of this sermon series are up on video. We're doing away with the audio part of it, so there will be the video of the sermon on there every week. The easiest way is when you go to our website, hit the Sermons tab, you'll go down, there's a little video camera icon right there. Click on that and it'll bring it up, and you can watch the sermon on video and that. So, but anytime you mention money, people get a little bit tense. So what I wanted to kind of do was break that tenseness right off this morning and talk about some core convictions. Does anybody in here have core convictions? Things that you actually believe right down to the core, whether you're a Christian or a non-Christian. Pretty much I think everybody has those, no matter what your background is. And they may be different than other people's, but they might be spoken or unspoken, but they kind of help you guide to decide what to do or not to do in life. And I thought I'd just have a little bit of fun with this, and I'll share some of mine. Maybe some of them are going to be different, maybe some of them are going to be the same. But the first one is this. Toilet paper goes over, not under. That's a core conviction right there. Listen, I've got this picture right here. This is right, and this is wrong. And believe me, if I ever come to your house and I go into your bathroom, I'll try to remember to bring this. But when I leave, it's going to look like this. Because I've done it several times, and that's how it's going to be. And you'll enjoy it so much more after I leave. I promise.
You don't create the freezer, it goes off in the paper.
Right. So, over, not under. Let's remember that. The second one. George Strait is the greatest country singer of all time.
Yes.
All time. Some of you people are thinking, well, I like country music, but I've never heard of it. Then you don't like country music.
Exactly.
What you like is the crap they spoon feed you today. So, not country music. But George Strait, I think, is the greatest country singer of all time. Next one. Dogs are better than cats. I like them both. Now, Carol's disagreeing. Hers is the opposite. Cats are better than dogs. Dwayne, he doesn't like either one. So, he's good either way. But I like cats too, but I'm a dog person. Now, this next one isn't one of mine, but it may be one of yours. Dishes go in the dishwasher, not in the sink. Now, the problem with that saying is, a lot of guys in here, when you put them into the dishwasher, your wife goes back behind you and rearranges them.
Exactly.
So to me, put them in the sink and let her do it right the first time.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So, and to be honest, it's the thought that counts. And in order to understand women, you have to know what they're thinking, which means guys, we're never going to understand women.
Exactly.
So let's move on, and that's a relationship message. We've got core convictions, and these were, I hopefully found them a little bit funny and we laughed. But the next one I'm going to share with you really drives me. Some people that don't know me well, you guys have gotten to know me pretty well, and you know what drives me, and you know how I think. I always think big, and
Which take us.
right, and you know, but I have a lot of people ask me what motivates me. Why do I do what I do? You know, why do you preach this or why do you preach that? Well, this court conviction that I'm going to share with you is something I believe that if you're able to cut my heart open and pull out one, this would be the thing that gets me out of bed in the morning. It's the thing that drives me all week long, and it's going to be the thing that drives me until I die. And that's this. Everyone's life would be better if Jesus were at the center.
Amen.
Amen?
Amen.
Awful quiet in here this morning. Let's get fired up a little bit. So I know I've already been fired up. We was talking about Pop-Tarts back in the back. Just a side note. Does anybody know why they would make a Pop-Tart without frosting? Isn't that just toast with jelly?
Yeah.
Okay. We're going to move on. Just had to throw that out there because that bugs me. But if you're here today and you're not a Christian, we're just acknowledge this. I'm glad you're here. You know, I'm pretty pumped up this morning. I've been pumped up with this whole message series. And you might have walked in with questions and doubts and stuff, and that's fine. But we're just glad you showed up this morning. But here's one thing we know about your life. You may not agree with it, but listen to me. It would be better if Jesus was at the center. You may be thinking, man, my life's not that bad right now. But let's talk about what you think at 2 in the morning when you wake up and you can't go back to sleep. Anybody have that issue? You know, if you've lived it all without Christ in your life, I know what you wrestle with. And here's what I know about you. Whether you believe it or not, right now your life would be better if Jesus was at the center. There's people in this room that are Christians, you know Christ, you do have a relationship with Jesus, but He's still not the center of your life. He's a part of your life, but He's not the center. And here's what I know about your life. It would be better if Jesus was at the center. I would go as far to say that if we live by that concept, all the problems that dominate the world, they wouldn't dominate the world anymore. We don't have an ISIS problem in the Middle East because it's not a political problem. It's a gospel problem. We don't have, if we took the gospel to the world like Jesus instructed us to do, we wouldn't have nearly the problems going on that we do. Social justice, injustices, if Jesus was at the center. We wouldn't have the sex slave trade if Jesus was at the center. We wouldn't have the economic crises that we have. We don't have some of the problems, wouldn't have some of the problems that the world does if Jesus was at the center of everyone's life. And this is why I would say this. If you're looking for a cause to sell your life out to, sell out to the gospel. Because there's nothing greater when it comes to the potential of change in the world than Jesus Christ being in the center of your life.
Amen.
It's not a one-time decision, it's a process. And I call this process surrender. Surrender's not easy, is it? We want to do what we want to do when we want to do it, how we want to do it. You know, I grew up in church. I don't know how many of you guys grew up in church, but maybe some of you, you've only known church here at Mount Tabor, but there was years that I kind of endured church. I didn't enjoy it, I just endured it. You know, I was just there. And at the end, and maybe this has happened to some of you guys who would stand and sing an invitational hymn to come to the altar. And some of you guys would remember this because you had to read the hymn books to stay awake during church. And did you ever notice in a lot of churches, they would never sing the third verse? 1, 2, and 4 every week. 1, 2, and 4. If you go back, that third verse usually had to deal with the Holy Spirit, and they wasn't interested in meeting that guy. They didn't want to talk about that guy. You know? Go back and look for it. Take my word for it. I'm sure you got a hymn book laying around that you stole from a church. That's fine. But they'd sing that hymn at the end of church, and usually a lot of times, and we're going to sing it today, I surrender all. You remember that song? I surrender all. I'm not a very good singer, that's why I like the videos. I surrender all to thee, my blessed Savior. And you would sing that over and over until somebody went forward. Finally, everybody got together and it was like, all right, Bob, you've got to take one for the team. You need to go forward and get right with God, or we're never going to get to go home. Because that's what a lot of churches did. They'd sing that till somebody would come up. And you'd be telling somebody, just make up a sin. Just get up there. And I thought about this the other day. What if we wrote a book called Honest Christian Hymns? We used to sing one in the church we went to. I'm so glad that I'm a part of the family of God. Have you ever sang that one? I know Ann and Mary will know all these. You guys know that one? I've been washed in the fountain, cleansed by His blood. If we were to sing that honestly, wouldn't we say, I'm surprised you're a part of the family of God? Wouldn't that be appropriate for some people? Or what about this one? The based on I surrender. I surrender some. I surrender some. Keep your hands off my wallet and my dating life and my internet porn addiction and my secret habit and my prescription drug addiction. I surrender some. And let's be honest. I mean, some of you guys might have the bullseye right on you when I mention that. But it's funny till you think about it, because in most cases, God's not holding out on you. You're holding out on God. And the issue that we think is the issue isn't the issue at all. Because the issue really comes down to, do we trust Jesus? Do we trust who He is and who He said He is? And do we trust He'll do what He said He'll do for us? So for everybody today, just so we can have a working definition, I want to define surrender. Surrender is not when we give God something. It's when we give Him everything. Amen?
Amen.
I'll put it in a little simpler terms, since it was a little quiet after I said that. I thought that was awful good. 95% commitment to Christ is 5% too less. Too short. You're a little short if you're giving 95% to God. Because eventually, we talked about it in week 1, remember? If He's not the Lord of all, eventually He'll be the Lord not at all. Right?
Yeah.
Last week, what did we talk about? We talked about, first week we talked about, is He ranked in our top 10? Is He a part of our life, or is He at the top of our life? And the reason we're talking about this in a money series is the toughest issue for a person to surrender to Jesus is their money. Amen?
Amen.
I've seen it time and time again. The last thing, I've seen people make tremendous strides for Christ. The last thing they'll let go of is their money. It's the last thing. Everything else they'll surrender, but not that. And that's why we keep coming back to this. It may not be money for you this morning. It might be a habit, an addiction. You know, it could be about a dating decision. It doesn't matter. Surrender is not when we give God something. It's when we give Him everything. And if you have your Bibles, we go to 1 Kings chapter 18. And if you haven't been here with us the first 2 weeks, I'm going to catch you up to speed really quick. We've been talking about Elijah, and God comes to him in 1 Kings chapter 17, and He says it's not going to rain for 3 years. So Elijah went and preached that, and of course nobody believed that. And for 3 years in Israel, we find out in 1 Kings 18 it did not rain. Which, remember, the first 2 weeks, if you was here, you said their agriculture, their economy was based on agriculture. And so what they have to have? Rain. They totally depended on God for rain. But God didn't let it rain for 3 years. So what we see in 1 Kings 18 is an economy that had crashed, unemployment at an all-time high, government was out of control, people were dying, they were losing hope, and it was not a good time to live in Israel because God would not let it rain. So Elijah shows up, he goes to Ahab, and Ahab's the king of Israel, and he challenges the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah. And those two had represented gods that Israel had chose to follow instead of God. And he says, why don't you get all your prophets and your leaders and we'll go to Mount Carmel and let's face each other and have a showdown. And that's where we were last week. And when Elijah up and said, how are you going to waver between two opinions? And we saw that the people said nothing. They had nothing to say. And we talked about indecisive people last week, about how getting behind them in the line at Taber and that frustrates you. And at the end of the message, we left it with the prophets of Baal danced around the altar all day and all evening, and Baal didn't answer. And here's what's crazy about that. The showdown with Baal actually should have given him the upper hand. Because if you've ever seen any pictures of what we think Baal looked like, he's really muscular and that, and he's holding a lightning bolt. They thought Baal controlled the weather. If Baal could have done anything, you'd think a guy with a lightning bolt could have started a fire, right? If I'm a betting guy, and I see a dude, there's just a normal guy there, and there's a guy with lightning, my money's on the lightning guy to start that fire, right? That's who I'm going with. You know, that would be very impressive. But Baal couldn't start the fire, which we said last week, and that shows us how the world has nothing that can satisfy us. You know, you think about that statement, and the world markets to us, it tells us what I'm giving you will not satisfy you. And I got a couple examples here. Who plays video games? Madden 1. What came out next? Madden 2. Madden 3. Madden 4. 5, 6. What is it? Madden 16 now? Every year they come out with a new one. It just keeps going, right? Every year they say how awesome that game is, yet the next year they supposedly make it more awesome. It never satisfies you. What about cell phones? iPhone 1, iPhone 2, iPhone 3, iPhone 4. You're never going to be satisfied with the things of the world. You're always going to be waiting on the next great thing. And we fall for that. You know, I'm not saying this morning that surrender is easy. It's not an easy process. I'm not saying I want to be surrendered all the time, because it's hard. There's days that I don't want to be surrendered to Christ, that I don't want Him to do, I don't want to do what He wants me to do. But still I know if everybody's life would be better, including mine, if Jesus was at the center. Now before we go on, I'm going to ask a series of 3 questions, kind of like a pop quiz. I know you guys are all excited about that. But here's the cool thing. I'm going to give you the answer to all 3 questions. It's the same word, and I'm not trying to trick you because I love you guys and I want you to get things right. The answer to the next 3 questions is the word water. Alright? First question. During this time when this story took place in the nation of Israel, what were the people most desperate for?
Water.
Let's do that one more time so we can get in practice. I don't think everybody's saying it. Okay. Say it one more time. What was the answer?
Water.
Much better. That's what I'd like to hear the next 2 times. They were most desperate for water. They didn't just want water. They didn't think that water was a nice idea. They didn't say, well, if we could work some water in our life every once in a while, it would be okay. They were desperate for water. Remember, I think it was in week 1 we looked at that they were worried their livestock was going to start dying because of lack of water. God brought them to a point of desperation so He could show them who He is and what He's capable of. And what I've realized in my own lifetime as I've looked over my past and I've been desperate in regards to an area of my life, that time of desperation was not God's curse in my life. It was God's blessing in my life. Because He's reminding me that I can't do life without Him. He's reminding me that there's things He can do for me. Things that I can't do myself. Things that I can't get done on my own.
Amen.
Desperation's not a curse, it's a blessing. You know, you can come to church and be desperate for God. We can read our Bibles and be desperate for God. You know, you ever been at church and you've seen somebody tweeting, getting ready for worship, or getting my worship on? That's somebody there that's not desperate for God. They're not. But you know, I feel like there's probably more than one person in here today, you've been desperate for God this week. There's a situation going on in your life. Maybe it's relational, emotional, financial, medical. You know, you've cried and you've wondered this week, does God hear me? Or does He care about me? And I would say it isn't coincidental that you're at church this morning, hearing a God that loves you and cares about you, who walks with you, and is doing things in your life right now that you're completely unaware of. But one day you'll benefit from them, because God always hears the cry of His desperate people. Number two, second question. What was the most valuable commodity in the entire land of Israel during this time?
Water.
As we're getting there, the most valuable commodity in the entire land. Water at this time was more valuable than gold, more valuable than silver, more valuable than land. You know why? Because water is the source of life. Still today in the Middle East, water is the source of life. You have water, you have life. You have no water, you have no life. And isn't that funny that Jesus said, I'm the living water, I'm the source of life? No Jesus, no life. That's probably purely coincidental. Second question. That was the second one. Third one is this. If you were going to go on a trip 2,500 years ago in the Middle East, and the trip was going to take you between a day and a week, and you were going to have to walk the entire trip, what's the one thing you would not leave home without?
Water.
You wouldn't leave home without water. 2,500 years ago in the Middle East isn't like it is today. I was talking a few weeks ago to a guy that goes to Israel every June. He takes a few students. He says it's cheaper in June. And the reason it's cheaper is because not many people go to Israel in June because it's hot. And his own words was, hell would be a relief after being in the Middle East in the summer. You know, he said you're pouring sweat, and he says it hasn't changed from all the years that he goes. You know, today, what if we get hot? We just pull into a drive-thru or a restaurant. They don't have that over there. So they probably will eventually at the rate they're growing. But the thing about this, 2,500 years ago in the Middle East, if you were going on a trip, if you left your house without water, it was suicidal. You didn't do it. These people that came to Mount Carmel, it's a location in Israel. They would have had to walk at least a day, many of them over a week, to make it to this location. And the one thing they would have had with them, all of them, was water, because that was most valuable to them. The one thing the nation was most desperate for was water. And just keep that in mind as we start going through some scripture here. We're starting chapter 18, verse 30. Then Elijah said to all the people, come near to me. And all the people came near to him, and he repaired the altar of the Lord that had been thrown down. Verse 31, Elijah took 12 stones. So here's 12 rocks, and I think this is huge, and we're coming back to that, but you need to remember the rocks. He rebuilt the altar with rocks. Remember Jesus said, I will build my church upon the rock. Isn't it funny how this is in the Old Testament, and Jesus says that in the New Testament, how the Bible agrees with the Bible. Amen?
Amen.
The rest of that verse. According to the number of the tribes of Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord came, saying, Israel shall be your name. Verse 32, and with the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord, and he made a trench about the altar as great as would contain 2 seas of seed. And I didn't look that up, but I guess that's a lot of seed, I'm guessing. Or they wouldn't have bothered to put that in there. Verse 33. And he put the wood in order and cut the bull in pieces and laid it on the wood. And he said, fill 4 jars with water and pour it on the burnt offering and on the wood. Now let's just go back for a moment. Say you're at this showdown here, and you just showed up and you've watched the prophets of Baal do their thing, and then you're like, you see this Elijah guy, and you're like, oh, I've heard great things about him. I heard he's really good. And he's getting ready to preach, and he gets up, and he starts this thing, and he takes the water and he pours it out. And somebody comes up to you and says, hey, you've got to go talk to that guy. So you pull him aside and you go, hey, listen, I don't know if you're from around here, but we've had a shortage on water. and you're wanting us to pour it out. We kind of have a word for somebody like you around here. It might be moron. You know? Now, I didn't say that, but they might have said that. None of us think that's really smart because we need that water, and here you want to pour it out. We're probably going to die without water. It hasn't rained for 3 years. So we'd appreciate it if you wouldn't do that water thing again. That'd be all right. So the next verse, and he said, do it a second time. And they did it a second time. And he said, do it a third time. And they did it a third time. By then, these people got to be thinking, man, what is he doing? A second? A third time? He's just wasting water. You know? I'm never coming back to hear this guy preach again. Because this is just crazy. So we go to verse 35. And the water ran around the altar and filled the trench also with water. Now some of these people, they were probably looking in the background and thinking, man, what could I do to get up there and get some of this water? You know, yet wouldn't you be thinking that if you've been without water for that long? But what I want to talk about in this part is, and I don't feel like I'm the smartest person in the world, but I know a little about the Bible. I know there's a lot of people probably in here that know more, because I don't know everything. But I know some stuff about the Bible. And to be honest, that's why the entrance exam to heaven is not an intelligence test, it's a blood test. That's why it's not about what we know, it's about who we know. That's what matters. Don't ever think that intellectual knowledge replaces a heart transformation, because it never will. Heart transformation can lead to something intellectual, but there's so many intellectual people who don't know Jesus. But this part has confused me for a few years. And this was my question. I'd be like, where did this water come from? You know? I believe the Bible's true, but it really bothered me where this was from. And I saw a sermon in my research. I saw a guy teaching on this. And he said, at the top of Mount Carmel, you can actually see the Mediterranean Sea. And he goes, if you can see it, that means it's close. So they probably got the water from the Mediterranean Sea. And then I got thinking, well, wait a minute. I can see the moon, but it's not that close. So that kind of, he lost his credit there. Then I heard another, that's going through the internet, I heard another sermon, and he said that, this guy said he'd been to Israel. He stood on the top of Mount Carmel, and he said that to get to the Mediterranean Sea, it would have took a day to send somebody there one time. For 3 different times, that would have taken 3 days for these verses to happen. And the Bible doesn't say 3 days later, does it? So I don't think that's what happened. So this guy, he said that there's a river in the Kishon Valley there. And to the right of the Mediterranean is that river. So he said they more than likely got the water from there. It's like a creek today, it said. So they think they got the water from the river. But in Kings chapter 18, I believe if there had been water there, the people would have gotten that water. Because it said they were desperate for water. They'd been down in the valley where the water was. They'd been looking for water. So I think the Kishon River, why it's there, I think it was dry. There wasn't any water there. So this continued my frustration on where did the water come from. So about 4 weeks ago, and it was the coolest thing, I met this guy named Ari. And he's actually from Israel. And he is a Bible guy through and through. 67 years old. He had a ton of stories. And I don't know, if there's somebody that knows more about the Bible than this guy, I'd like to meet him. But, so when he said he was from Israel, I asked him about this. And he goes, we read the text, and he looked at me and goes, okay, Rodney, where did they get the water? That's why I'm visiting with you today, to find out where they got the water. You're the head honcho, you know this. And so I gave him every person's answer when they don't know what it is when we're talking about the Bible. Jesus? It's like, no, he didn't. It wasn't Jesus. And I'm like, he goes, so this is what he told me. He goes, you don't understand where the water came from, because in the American culture, it doesn't have the same significance as it did in the Hebrew culture. He said the number one thing they need to understand, a Jewish person in that culture, to take water, which was their source of life, the most valuable thing to them, to pour water on a rock was an extreme act of worship. Because they didn't know where they was going to get their next jar of water from. And we can just turn on the faucet and we get it freely. He said, so that's the part you don't understand. They didn't know when it was going to rain. They didn't know when they'd get that water replaced. They didn't know when they were going to go into a time of feast or a time of famine. So for a Jewish person to take what was most valuable to them, water, and pour it out on a rock, was an extreme act of worship. He said, this is the exact words, it was a demonstration of complete surrender to God. Because when people did that, they weren't just saying, I surrender all. They were showing that they surrender all. There's a difference between saying it and a difference between showing it. And when people poured their water out on the rock, it was an act of surrender. Because they were taking what was most valuable and saying, God, I love you. The second thing he said I need you to understand is Elijah got the water from the people. He said, if you're going to have, and I couldn't understand that one. So, this is what he said. He said, there wasn't a well, there wasn't a river. They couldn't have gone to the Mediterranean Sea. They didn't go to the river down there. All of them people that had traveled there, from a day's distance to a week's distance, had water with them. And he said when Elijah was challenging these people, the reason he did it 3 times is he had to call for commitment 3 times, because a lot of people don't commit the first time. The first time he said, basically you guys have tried Baal, you've tried the system of the world, and it doesn't work, so why don't you surrender to God? So there was one group that came forward, but 2 groups stood back. After that first group, again he said, I'm unapologetically telling you, some of you are holding out on God and you need to come forward and pour out your offering right now. Then the second group pulled up and they poured out their water. And this was the funny part, because I would have never thought this guy from this guy. And he said, then there's always that one group, and he calls them, he says, I call that group the hell no, we won't go group. And I busted out laughing, because this guy's 67 years old. He's like a brainiac, and he goes, I call them hell no, we won't go group. And there's people like that in every church, right? That's their attitude. One more time, unapologetically, Elijah got up in front of them and said, you need to get this right. You have not followed God in this area of your life, and He's left you dry. He's left you desperate. You need to surrender. And finally, the third group came up and poured out their water on the rock. What's the significance of that? Very simple. Everybody's life would be better if Jesus were at the center. Just like they held water as their source of life in the Middle East 100 years ago, in America, we hold money as our source of life. Money is the one area that most people will not surrender. And as your pastor, I will unapologetically tell you that until you surrender your finances to Jesus, until you do that, you are not surrendered. You have not surrendered your whole life to Christ. We can have all kinds of conversations, all kinds of dialogue. You can argue with me, you can disagree with me. At the end of the day, what's the motive of your heart when it comes to money? It might be dating. Some of you are dating somebody and you're thinking about dating somebody you have no business with. Some of you are married and you're starting to flirt around and you have no business doing that. Some of you are in a career and you need to be in a different career. Maybe some of you guys are in school in a major and you need to be a different major. I'm just saying, what is it that you value the most? And could you take that and pour it out and give it to Jesus? Because that's what surrender is. Let me show you what happens when desperate people get together. Verse 36, and at the time of the offering of the oblation, Elijah the prophet came near and said, O Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known this day that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and that I have done all these things at your word. I want to stop real quick, because what did Elijah pray for? Did he pray for what they needed the most? Water? No. They needed water, but he didn't pray for water. He said, God, let them know that you're God. I didn't see this for many years in this text. But so if you're seeing it for the first time, don't feel bad. If you've just seen it, just know that I'm sometimes a moron too, and I didn't see it. He didn't pray for rain, he prayed for God's power. Verse 37, answer me, O Lord, answer me, that this people may know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you have turned their hearts back. Verse 38, then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt offering, and the wood and the stones and the dust, and licked up the water that was in the trench. Again, if the land's dry and it hasn't rained for 3 years, what's the last thing you want falling out of the sky? Fire. When land is dry, you don't need fire. But the people, it got their attention, because in verse 39, it says, when all the people saw it, they fell on their faces and said, the Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God. Everybody stopped right there and said, isn't that a miracle? And I wouldn't say that's a miracle right there, because that isn't what they needed. They didn't need fire. They needed rain. But God demonstrated His power to them. We're going to skip down to verse 41, where it says, and Elijah said to Ahab, go up, eat and drink, for there is a sound of rushing of rain. If you were standing at this scene in the Bible, number one, there wasn't a cloud in the sky yet. We're going to see that in just a few minutes. The sky was clear. Here you have Elijah telling Ahab, basically, hold on to your fort, because the best is yet to come. We see right here Elijah believing in a God that could do so much more than anyone can imagine. And he's telling a pagan king who had not turned to God, you know what? In spite of the fact that you've walked away from God, in spite of the fact that you've led a nation of people away from God, God is about to pour His rain down on this land. Rain and grace pretty much almost mean the same thing in Hebrew language. So what people need, what they wanted was rain. What they saw was the power of God fall. And what happens when the fire fell is they understood that God's power. But they needed to understand His grace. And the thing that would help them understand God's grace is if God allowed the rain to fall. So Elijah's telling Ahab, don't you lose hope, because it's coming. And I want to use that this morning to tell somebody here. Don't lose hope because you're dry, because you're desperate, because you felt bad this week, or because you felt abandoned or forgotten. I'm telling you this morning, when a person surrenders to Jesus, and it may not make it right immediately, He will make it right eventually. Because everybody's life is better when Jesus is at the center of it. You better hold on to your fork, because when you're surrendered, you'll see it. Verse 42. So Ahab went up to eat and to drink, and Elijah went up to the top of Mount Carmel, and he bowed himself down on the earth and put his face between his knees. And this next verse, I love this. And he said to his servant, go up now, look towards the sea. And he went up and looked and said, there is nothing. And he said, go again. 7 times he told Elijah, go back. How would you like to be Elijah's servant there? You think you've got it bad in your job? Here he is, he's praying. He's got nothing there. And it says, go back, still nothing. Go back, I've got you. He has to go back 7 times. And we can't miss this, because Elijah had to say almost a 2-verse prayer for the fire to fall. but it took a lot more for the rain to fall. We love to see God's power, but what we need is God's grace. And I think one of the problems in the church over the past 2 decades in America is we've been praying for fire to fall when we actually need to see the rain fall. Because if the grace of God fell on our land, people would believe in the power of God like no other. The power of God is in the grace of God. And don't miss this because it's good. The power of God is in the grace of God, but the grace of God is a harder concept to grasp and understand. And we see Elijah begging God for rain instead of demanding that God show himself in power. He goes on to say in verse 44, and at the 7th time he said, behold, a little cloud like a man's hand is rising from the sea. And he said, go up, say to Ahab, prepare your chariot and go down, lest the rain stop you. Basically he said, I told you once, if you ain't gotten that chariot yet, you better stop talking to everybody, stop taking selfies with everybody, and you need to get in your chariot and head down the mountain. Verse 45. And in a little while, the heavens grew black with clouds and wind, and there was a great rain, and Ahab rode and went to Jezreel. Quick question. Think the people that gave their water in the jars those 3 times, think they got their water back? Absolutely they did. You know why? Because you cannot outgive God. Amen?
Amen.
It's spiritually impossible to outgive God. The people that gave their water, they thought Elijah was crazy for spilling it out. And they didn't get it back immediately, did they? Wasn't right away they got it back, but they got it back eventually. And they got back more than they gave in the first place, because that's how the God that we serve is. He don't want what we want for our lives. He wants what He wants for our lives. And what He wants in our lives is so much bigger than we could ever imagine. So much greater for our lives than we could ever do on our own. That's why I would recommend complete surrender in life. Because surrender is not when we give God something, it's when we give Him everything. And He's at the center of our lives. I want to ask you this question. I'm going to be dead honest. What's the issue this morning in your life that you can't let go of? What's the issue? What's your issue in life that's like the water? It's a thing that's so valuable to you. It could be many things. A lot of you guys, it's your money. And we've got to make that right. We have to make it right. You know? Some of you, the only thing you're holding on to this morning is bitterness and anger because somebody hurt you in the past. And I know you're here today holding on to that, and you won't surrender that to God. You're holding on to a habit that you can't get rid of, something that you can't surrender. Surrender is not when we give God something. It's when we give Him everything. And the reason we should surrender is because we're told in the 1 Corinthians 2:9, but as it is written, what no eye has seen, nor ear heard, nor the heart of man imagined, what God has prepared for those who love Him. Isn't that verse awesome? You know, that's basically, I'll dumb it down a little bit. We can't conceive what God wants to do in our lives. We can't even think about it. I consider myself a very creative person. You know, I think I come up with some pretty good sermon illustrations and that. I can't imagine what God has for me if I surrender and put Him at the center of my life. You know, I can't imagine the blessings He has for me. So this morning we all need to surrender. We all have to give 100%. Let's pray. Good, bow your head and close your eyes. Father, right now in the name of Jesus, pray that You would just be so real in this room this morning. So real that to some of us that you've never been before. To some people in here this morning, this was a money message. For some people, it wasn't a money message at all, because maybe you realize this morning you've never given your life to Christ. You've never become a Christian. You've never said, Jesus, here I am, I surrender all. And I hope this morning we realize that becoming a Christian is not, dear God, please don't let me go to hell. Becoming a Christian is, Jesus, I believe that you are Lord, and that you can do so many more things in my life than I can do on my own. I can't do it without you. And I hope that as we head out into the work week this week and head out into the world, that we realize we're never outgive God. We can never outgive Him. And I hope we also realize that we're in the middle of so much chaos and that, and we wonder, how can all these things be happening in my life? Maybe Jesus isn't the center of your life at all. Maybe He's not even in your top 10 anymore. You have to get that back. You have to surrender 100%. So Jesus, I ask that as we head out into the world, that you just lead us and guide us and show us those situations and those things in our life that we haven't surrendered. I know during our sermon series, Dangerous Prayers, that was one of the things. Search my heart. Let us have that prayer every morning. Search our heart and show us the things that we haven't surrendered to you, Lord. I just ask that you continue to lead and guide our church in the direction that it should go. And I just ask blessings for everyone here this morning. We ask all this in Jesus' precious name. Amen.